The following QCCS Mackay Cutters Change the Game episode contains critical and confronting conversations that some listeners may find upsetting. Audience discretion is advised.
Change the Game, proudly brought to you by the QCCS Mackay Cutters.
Hi everyone, welcome to QCCS Mackay Cutters Change the Game podcast. We have Minds Align, Nick Bennett and Rowena Hardy joining us. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Yui people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Nick, Rowena, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've had a few coffee catch-ups since myself returning back to Mackay and getting to know you both. It's been really interesting. And I thought that our audience would also like to get to know you, and I think your stories are really interesting. So thank you for coming. Your business is Minds Align. Can you tell us a little bit about how Minds Align started? I know you've been in Mackay for 21 years and take us through the journey of Minds Align.
Yeah, thank you. It came out of adversity really, didn't it? I might let Nick describe it because it was his intention originally to set the company up. It had been kind of on our minds for a while, but 2007 was a really pivotal year for us for all sorts of reasons. So I'll let Nick start with that.
Yeah, we were working in a small consulting firm at the time, and that had gone through a buyout process. We'd been very heavily involved in working with the mining industry, doing leadership, organisational change and coaching. I was also going through 12 months of chemo, and that was for a liver disease that I had, and what I realised going through that was that if I was talking about leadership and I had a comfortable car provided, I had a phone provided, I had an office provided, how was I leading? And so the question for me came up through this difficulty, going through chemo and becoming quite very ill and very challenged in my thinking, was to go, right, okay, so here's my collision. And I determined, I was up at Finchhatton Gorge one day, lying in a waterhole, trying to cool off. And I had an epiphany that said, well, it's time. It's time to set up your own business. It's time to step out and see whether what you offer actually has any credibility or whether you're hiding behind somebody else's badge. So that was the decision I made. And when I determined that, I was actually naked in that hole, right? So that's not a great picture, but think about it. And it was a beautiful day, and I jumped up and I went, yes. And next thing I hear all this applause behind me, and I turn around, there's a German tour group walking past me, and it just sort of seemed to make sense to me at that point that the decision was right. So that's where it started. We were very fortunate that when I put the word out, Rowena had also been away in the UK, and she had some family duties that she had to take care of, so I was kind of working through this on my own, but in consultation with her. And then when we put it out that we were setting up Minds Aligned, we were very fortunate that key clients said, well, we'll go with you. And so that was how we started. And that was January 2008. We hit the ground running, and we haven't looked back since. It's been amazing.
Fantastic. So I really love the slogan, which is the name of this episode, one conversation at a time. Can you talk to me about the philosophy of that?
I think we've all recognised probably, certainly in the last 18 months, but probably over time as well, is the importance of a conversation with somebody. And just a day-to-day conversation, passing time, how are you sort of conversation. But I think more importantly, it's when we have that sense that somebody actually needs a phone call. And it's amazing what a conversation can do. It may start out as a simple conversation, but you never know the impact it's having. And so when we talk about one conversation at a time, it's really, when you first get to know somebody, you have a conversation, and then the conversation may evolve over time. But I really like the concept of, when you have the right conversation with the right person at the right time, it can really make a huge difference. In so many ways, and you never know who you're talking to, you never know what you're going to talk about, and you never know how you're changing somebody in terms of their mindset or their approach to life, or just something you say without even intending to changes something for them. And we may never know what we do, but the whole concept of having a conversation is there's no pressure, it's just have a conversation.
And actually, to add to that, in the conversations we're having, we're often asking questions that help people, well, we're definitely asking questions that help people to explore more about their own thinking, about raising the level of awareness of why they might be making decisions or taking action or not. And that's been very important from an evolution of ourselves and our business.
Mm-hmm.
So that one conversation at a time isn't about setting an agenda, it's just saying, here we are, let's have a go.
Yeah.
And that can be with a team, that can be with an organisation, it can be with an executive team, it can be with an individual. So it's been a very, very powerful little line, if you like.
And it links nicely into the Minds Aligned, name of the company, which took some tweaking for a while, and we've kind of settled on it. But it's in terms of when you have like-minded people, you can have any conversation. When they're all aligned in the same direction, or your conscious, unconscious, higher conscious, if you like, minds are aligned, everything feels settled and grounded. So that alignment gives you the opportunity to have any conversation, and it could be appear to be surface, it could be, a really shifting conversation, or it could be something, very much deeper than that. But I think the whole thing about the alignment is a conversation can help you kind of realign to what's important for you in any way, in any part of your life.
And part of that alignment too, I know when I'm having conversations with people, is actually that they're listening and taking in what I'm saying. So what are some, do you have techniques with your own listening, and what does listening mean for you guys within Minds Aligned and one conversation at a time?
What a great question, Mitch, because, often we're so busy listening with the intent to interrupt that we forget to actually spend time understanding what people are doing. I think it's being able to be present. It's actually being in the moment with that person, not being distracted by anything else. And that's a hell of a commitment to make, because we've all got busy things going on. There's 100 things. You've probably got 100 things happening out and around you right now. Yet here you are sitting with us having a conversation with meaning. So I think it's from a commitment and a respect. Here you are, here we are. Let's talk through this. Let's take this time and be totally present with each other and just engage. And people have I don't know whether I can swear, but people have a bullshit meter, right? They'll know whether you're genuine or not. And you know it yourself. If somebody's paying attention to somebody else, or is distracted, or they're picking up their phone, you'll turn off like that. And that's not what it's about. It's actually giving respect to you as a human being and to any person, and taking time with them. So that's what listening is from a technique perspective. I think it's get out of this, get into this. By that I mean your heart, and actually be with that person. Now that sounds a little abstract for an executive coach and a facilitator, but it's true.
And it used the word engagement, and that's really important for any conversation. You have to engage with the person first. You can't just kind of bowl up and launch into a conversation. That's not necessarily appropriate for everybody. And Nick might, but it's not necessarily appropriate. But there's all sorts of things. It's not, when we're having a conversation, it's not just the language we're using, because words can mean all sorts of things. It's the tone, it's the pitch, it's the rate. It's active listening. It's engaging eye contact and everything else. So there's so many small gestures and just small aspects of us. It's like a whole 360, which is why face-to-face is really good. Face-to-face conversations are always good, because you're getting that whole 360 of somebody. The way they're sitting, the way they talk, shifts in their colouring, even where their eyes are. You can tell a lot about the conversation and what's happening for that person just by observing them, but while still engaging and being very present, as Nick said. And I will probably point out, there's a lot of people wear hearing aids. I wear two myself. And it makes me much more aware and cautious about how I'm listening, because it's so easy to miss stuff. And, particularly in the work we do, which can get in some really deep, and painful things for people, you do not want to mishear or not hear anything, because it can be very hard and challenging for that person to bring this forward, and it takes a lot of courage for them to do that. So the important thing is to really hear, and really hear what the meaning is behind that. So there's so many different aspects to listening. It isn't purely about the words, as I say. It's a whole 360, and being curious about the person and genuinely caring about what they're saying to you, without the intention of interrupting, and just staying on track. It's not about you necessarily. It's about inviting the person into the conversation and really engaging that way.
And what about the environment? How much does that play a part in the conversation, and especially listening and being able to open up? So the environment you guys create within Minds Align, or even just go and have a coffee catch up, or we're in an environment like this where it's nice and quiet, and how much does the environment play a part?
To be honest, I think it's less about the environment and more about what you create in that environment, which is safety.
Mm-hmm.
So to have a truly deep conversation, and again, come back to this with a team or with an individual, it's making the space safe so that they feel that they can contribute. And that way, when you've created that, either through the relationship that you're building or the connection you're building, or through the fact that you're making sure you're hearing everybody and inviting everybody to speak, I think that is a major impact. So that creating a safe space where people can feel safe to speak is number one for me. Because we could do this in a coffee shop, we could do it out on the paddock, we could be in the office, we could be driving in a car. It's making sure that people feel safe.
And privacy, it depends on the nature of the conversation, but privacy is such a big one, and some people are very private, particularly when it comes to talking about deeply personal stuff. There's some great research around how it's different types of interaction, and therefore maybe different environments will support different types of conversation. For example, adolescents, teenagers feel it's very confronting to have somebody face them, or even be three-quarters, which is often better. If you sit side by side, so Nick's suggesting sitting in a car or walking just side by side, they don't feel there's so much pressure on them. And for a lot of guys as well, walking side by side, moving and talking, having the conversation can be really helpful. So sitting in a coffee shop, particularly someone like Mackay, where a lot of people know people, you don't necessarily want to be seen with who you're with. So the reason we love the offices we're in, they're light, calm, quiet, airy spaces where you're not going to feel enclosed or like you can't get some air kind of thing.
Yeah, great. So we touched on aligning the minds, and that's the name of the business, but let's talk about also aligning actions, setting goals, and also finding purpose. So the three definitely buzzwords, I guess, that are going around, but tell me the importance of getting them right.
I love the question, because for me, everything has to start with purpose. Whether it's your purpose for being on the planet in the first place, your purpose for being in life, your purpose to be in a role, whatever it might be, unless you're really clear about what your purpose is, you can meander and go all sorts of different directions and feel like you're not really achieving anything. But once you really can identify your purpose, and that can be really hard for a lot of people and can take a very long time, then it's appropriate to start looking at goals and the actions and things. Goal, do I like the word or not? But not particularly. But the fact is, it's almost like milestones. Like how will I know that I'm making progress towards what I want to achieve in terms of my purpose? What's the kind of desired outcome? What are some of the milestones that know that I'm going to get there? And then the actions come after that. So if this is what I want in terms of milestone, what's going to get me there? And that can be really small, incremental steps. It doesn't have to be anything major, but you need the clarity, like even for a company, having that vision and that purpose, the reason for being here is vital to have everybody aligned and facing the same direction to know how they can contribute and align to what's expected of them.
I probably look at it a little differently to that. I think there's nothing wrong with having a meander, going off and exploring and engaging with the world so that you can come to understand it. If we don't have experiences that challenge us, we can't really define what's critical and important to us. That's only my view. I've done many things in my life to discover what I'm actually good at and what I enjoy doing. And so having those kind of hard-edged experiences, and I mean extremes, have been remarkable for then defining this is how I am in the world. And I think with that, once you've got that grounded nature within yourself, then it's easy to focus your energy and attention on things that contribute to that. So it's okay to wander. I mean, you must have wandered at some point yourself.
Oh, definitely.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just about maturing and growing up and learning from others and making mistakes.
Yeah, making mistakes. That hard edge of experience. There's other brain studies that show us that our prefrontal cortex, this executive and decision-making center of the brain, isn't really fully wired for men until between the ages of 28 and 32. So we live in a very impulsive, reactive world up until the time we understand the nature of consequence. And when we do that, That's our prefrontal cortex, executive and decision making, linking up and helping us then go, if I make that decision, this will be the consequence. Prior to that, and I'm sure every person listening will have had the same experience, I like it, I do it. Oh shit. It hurts, right?
Yeah.
And we learn through that. For girls, they talk about it between the ages of 18 and 24. So women mature earlier than men, understand the nature of consequences earlier than men, start making better decisions earlier than men, while men are still going out for the 15 gargle blasters on a Friday and Saturday night. Girls are looking more into the future and understanding the consequences of that. So there's some things to be said for that level of experience and learning, so that we can actually then come to understand what's important for us. The other thing we haven't spoken about is about having a grounding and a set of values, things that you will not compromise in your life. And those things are hard earned as well and hard understood. So, you're defining through experience what's important for you. You define the focus and direction that you want to take, and goals if that's what's important. But it's what are the things that will contribute to my existence, and not just for me, but for a contribution to community, for a contribution to my family, for a contribution to others.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things we all discover and explore. I mean,
Your self-worth and happiness that ties into that too.
yeah, when you're giving yourself permission, and it's a hard thing to come to again, I think, to actually step away from being influenced by others and realise this life is about my choices, and I can't abdicate that responsibility to anybody else. I can't blame anybody else. I make the choice about how I exist in the world and how I come to every day, and I am responsible for every one of those decisions and choices that I make. When you've got that, then guess what? You're unencumbered by all of the rubbish that we hear around us, and we start really focusing on, this is life for me. Because, as we know, and from my own experience, no one gets out of here alive, and tomorrow is promised to no one, as cliche as it sounds.
That's right.
So what are we doing today to actually give the best to it for ourselves and for others?
So I'd like to go a little bit more personal now, and for both, because you both had different experiences through this event, and it was really personal for you, Nick, because you were right in the middle of it. But 2014, 13.
I know where you're going. Yep.
Yeah, you had an experience in PNG on the Kokoda Trail. I'll let you share the story, but the question I'd like to ask to both of you of what we're just talking about values and purpose and understanding who you are, how did that change you both from before the experience and event and to after?
Would you like to go first?
Probably be...
Oh,
No,
I'll go.
explain the event first, because
Okay.
we're actually two events in that year.
There's
Both.
two major events in that year.
as
for
much
me.
as you'd like to share, you don't have to share everything.
So I had decided after doing Kokoda, so this isn't about Kokoda, it's about the thing called the Black Cat Track. I decided that I did Kokoda in 2006, getting ready for that chemo program in 2007. And I also found out about this thing called the Black Cat Track. Mm-hmm. And the Black Cat Track is written up as the second or third toughest trek in the world. So for a guy like me, that excites me. It doesn't excite everybody, but it excites me. So I went out and found out about this thing, and I invited about 21 or 22 clients, friends, leaders, because I anticipated I want to set up a leadership program challenging people to the extreme. A few things happened, but we get into 2013, and I just established that was the date was going to be September, where I was going to do that. And in doing that, I went to do my benchmark workout, which whenever I say that to Rowena, she goes, "Oh, no, not again," because things tend to happen. I was working out in the gym, and actually I was on the beach, and I had a heart attack, which surprised me because I'm a relatively fit person. This was pretty challenging. So getting through that made me even more determined that I was going to go onto this thing called the Black Cat Track. So that heart attack, that created some real challenges and some real issues. Mm-hmm. After a few months, I had a very close friend, Frank Marchetti. I don't know if you know Frank, but many people will. Frank, who unfortunately is no longer with us, was a bit of a mentor for me. He and I climbed Mount Dalrymple as a measure of my fitness to make sure I'd be able to go out onto the Black Cat track. I'd also engaged with a great mate, Steve Ward, to come on the trip as well, and he made one promise to Rowena, that he would make sure I came back alive because of this heart attack.
Yeah.
However, on the first day of the trek, we were up in the middle of nowhere. We had 18 porters and a 5-year-old boy. I don't know if you've been to PNG.
I have with the Cutters with footy, but not to the Kokoda tracks or anything like
So this was the Black Cat tracks in a different position altogether to Kokoda. It's much more remote. It's much more extreme. So we were there. It was a miserable day. It was very exciting. We had 8 of us in our trekking group and a trekking guide, and we set off with 18 porters and a 5-year-old boy up to our first campsite, which was called Bennett Donkey. It took us about 6.5, 7 hours to climb, all the way up into the mountains, up into the high country, up through the jungle line, and right up into this little goat track they called the Black Cat track. We got into a place called Bennett Donkey, which is our first camp, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that would have been at about 2:05, I think we set up. And then I heard all this noise at around 4:05. I was lying in my tent, and I thought the boys had come running into the camp saying, "Oh, look, we've found some bush tucker or whatever it is." I heard all this, which is what I heard on Kokoda when I did that. But I hear this noise, and I'm thinking, "Oh, wow, okay." I'm coming out of my tent, reaching back to grab my camera. Next thing, bang! And I'm on my knees, I'm covered in blood, and I thought I'd been shot. And when I look around, there's a guy walking away from me holding a sawn-off shotgun. He'd take me out right across the top of the head, split my head open, fall onto the ground. I can hear these noises like this. I'm going, why are they packing into the porter's camp, which was about 7 or 8 metres away from me? And they were actually attacking the porters. 2 of the porters, they murdered them. They attacked the rest of our trekking group and porters, and that attack lasted for half an hour. So it's difficult to give you a sense of how challenging that was. But you asked before this event, I was coming back and recovering from a heart attack. I was incredibly determined. I was very, very focused, and I was going to have the adventure of a lifetime. That's what I put out to the universe. So I got that, not quite in the way I expected, and it took me 18 months probably to recover. I went through what they talk about as post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had to really fight to find myself and ground myself again. So I could talk a little bit more about that, but I guess I'll hand it over to Ro because she was across both of those events.
Yeah, so you were back in Australia, Mackay at the time?
Yep. And funny how, I don't know if people watching understand about intuition, but how you kind of get that sensation of something, you can't name it, can't know something, but Nick actually in retrospect recognised that maybe his heart attack was a bit of an intuition thing going, and it should have been a bit of a message. Mine was when I was driving him to the airport to take him to catch the flight to go to PNG. It was a really it's an unusual song on the radio, and it gave me that sensation going, there's something not right about this trip. I don't know what it is. I can't stop him. I would never have stopped him, but there was that kind of like impending something's wrong here.
Yeah. Do you remember the song?
No, I actually found it when I was looking through some things. I wanted to play it to Nick because he had no idea he was everything else. But I think it was by what's the name of the singer who's a really haunting voice, a female singer, haunting voice, almost operatic. I can probably find it.
Alanis Morissette?
Was it? No. She was in back. Anyway, I'll find it. Anyway, it was kind of that sensation. So the first time I knew anything had happened was I got a call from the trek organizer. And unusually, because when my hearing aids are out, I can't hear anything, I had my mobile by the bed, and I kind of heard something. By the time I picked it up, the call had gone, and going, this is 2 o'clock in the morning or something, and going, from my experience, my past experience was a call at this time in the morning is never good. It's something, happening that I need to be aware of. So And then they called the home phone, which I did hear, and it was the trek guide saying there'd been an incident on the track. That's all he said. Obviously, given Nick's background, my thought when he's had a heart attack, he's in the middle of nowhere, he's gone. Because that was just where your brain goes. It's like, it gave me some certainty, it must be that kind of thing. And it wasn't that. He just said they'd all been attacked, and he gave me very sketchy information. And said that he'd call me back, which he did. Because at that point I couldn't sleep, and I then put my hearing aids in so I could hear the phone calls, and it kind of played out from there, really. But I eventually heard that the story I got was he'd been hit by a machete. Now, he actually was hit, I don't think he actually mentioned that, by a sawn-off shotgun, which is still bad, but there could have been potentially a lot of more damage with a machete across the head than a sawn-off shotgun. It was still bad enough. But I didn't get the whole picture. So, of course, I'm sitting back in Australia going, I don't know what's happening, and I'm waiting to hear. And then he said, I can see headlights coming down the hill, so I'll be back in touch with you. I thought headlights, he meant head torches. I'm thinking, well, they're not too far away at all. And actually meant was car headlights, and they were some hours away. So there was some hours of me not knowing what to do. But in the midst of all of this was, I don't know how they do it, but I got my first media call at around about 4 o'clock that morning. Wanting information. I'm going, I've got nothing for you. I really cannot give you anything. And like them or hate them, the media have a place, I understand that, and news and everything else. But it's very difficult to be polite when you're still concerned and you have no idea what's going on. So I was polite, and each time, and I had dozens of calls once they got hold of me, and dozens of calls. And I said, all I said to each of them was, I've got nothing for you, and I'm not the person you want to speak to. Eventually, it'll probably be Nick when he comes home, if and when he's ready and he wants to do that. But I took everybody's number, and I took all the details and said, I will call you back, or Nick will call you back. And I was respectful about it. But meantime, it took me a while to find out exactly what had happened, and eventually to be able to speak to Nick.
Yeah. So we were still up on the hill at that point and determining how the hell we get out of here. We triaged the guys that we could. So in other words, all of us had first aid kits, and 4 of the trekkers were wounded, and several of the guides had been hacked up across the legs or back of the legs with these machetes. So it was pretty bloodthirsty and incredibly violent. Christy King, our trekking guide, we nominated her for the Star of Courage for her behaviour, for what she did for us in that event. One of the guys, the leader, who calls out and he says, who's the boss here? She stands up. She's a relatively short Australian girl. She had a black T-shirt, black shorts, black leggings, and a black bandana on. She's very, very fit, and she walked straight into him, and he said, where's the money? And she said, the money's in that backpack. And he's just picked this bag up, slashed it open. This box of kina fell out. They were expecting, I think, that there was going to be thousands and thousands of dollars, for want of a better term. But we were only carrying enough money to pay the village fees as we were going through, and the wages for the porters would come at the end, because there's no point giving wages to your porters because they'll basically take your gear and head into the bush. However, then he said to her, he's basically, I'm watching this, right? I'm standing there absolutely in shock, or lying there actually absolutely in shock, bleeding like you wouldn't believe. I'm on blood thinners, so there was no, this wasn't stopping, and I was just covered in, I looked like a horror movie, to be honest. And I watched him pick his blade back out, and I thought, here we go. What are they going to do to her? Will I be found out? Because they could drag her off into the bushes. They could have done anything to her. And I thought, how will we stand up in this? And this is the thoughts that go through your mind while you're in shock and horror at what's actually happening. This devastation of people just being chopped up and cut up. And anyway, he's pulled his blade back, and I thought, here we go. And he smashed her on the side of the arm with the flat of the blade and said, sleep, no look. In other words, go down, lie down, don't look. They continued to ransack the camp, and then they ran off. So they were in there for about half an hour, and the devastation, I've got photographs that just show how devastating that camp was. We triaged the guys that we could. We managed to eventually get calls out. There's a whole story to it, but we then decided we needed to go. And so this walking conga line of wounded, staggering down the hill, leaving the porters there to look after each other, because there was no point in us staying there at that point, so off we went down the hill. And eventually we could see villagers coming up to us. This is at night, so this is about 9:30, 10:30 at night by the time we're getting close, even close to help. And these were some of the villagers would go past. They were all armed, carrying weapons, rifles or machetes or bows and arrows or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And from each group, one would peel off and stay with us. So we had this lovely group of people from the local villages walking down with us. And we were just completely in shock. You know, for the first few hours we were in the jungle. I was covered. I had a towel and a head torch on because we just walked for 2.5 hours, and then eventually I couldn't even lift my head up. I was just so covered in blood. And I was concussed, I'm sure. But we eventually got out, and the Morobe mining guys had come with their vehicles to pick us up at a point where that they could get access. They took us back, and Christy's husband Daniel, he had brought a doctor and a surgeon and 2 nurses up from Ley. So as soon as they got message, he just grabbed people and brought them up, and that's about 2.5 or 3 hours away. So they were at the Morobe Mining's office in a place called Wow, where we got stitched up and looked after. And eventually I could have a conversation with Ro very briefly, just to let her know I was alive, you know, that it wasn't my heart attack, that this thing had happened. And within 2 or 3 days, we were back in Mackay. Steve and I were back here. We're supposed to be gone for 9 or 10 days, and here we were. And life had changed. And so you ask about how I was after that. I was just in a state of shock, completely removed from what was happening. I was still having conversations with people, but inside I was in not fear exactly, but I was like looking out at the world from inside. I was completely dissociated from what was happening. And I recognise that now as part of this process of the impact of this traumatic stress. And I'm sure there are others who've had those experiences, because I do have conversations with clients who have gone through a story, not that same story. And every few months I'd turn to her and say, I think I'm getting better. She's going, I don't know about that, because I was so different. I was become much more introverted. I wasn't nearly as expressive as I used to be. Even the dog didn't recognise me when I got back. He wouldn't come to me. We'd had him for 8 years at that point, and he wouldn't come to me. And
so noticed something different in you.
Yeah, the energy that I was bringing was incredible. Was totally different. And so, it's interesting. We talk about labels. You get these labels, right? And so as I journeyed through this, sort of coming to awareness, we did a lot of things to help. And again, that's part of the story of supporting those who've been injured over there and their families, and people were incredibly generous. But for me personally, what I was working through was where am I, and who am I, and how am I, and what's going on for me. Normal became different, and I also sort of realised that, and this was a realisation over time, that the use of labels that we provide to ourselves and to others has a really limiting effect on who we are. I hear people, you talk about self-esteem and self-worth before. People tell themselves they're not worthy, or they're not capable, or I'll never be able to do that, or they diminish themselves in that language to self. And I'd been given this label called post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm a victim. I'm a victim, and I've never been a victim in my life. I grew up in a pretty tough environment, and here I am with this label, and I'm a victim. It means I've lost my power. I became powerless. And I was just lurching from one situation to another without any kind of real conscious awareness of what was happening. And it was about 18 months later that I got into conversation with a gentleman, and I can't remember his name now, but it was an epiphany, and it was an enlightening.
Where was the conversation?
It was just on the phone, because we wanted to get somebody to go up to PNG to do some rehab. It's observational rehab on the porters who'd been injured. And however I found them, I got into conversation with them, and we talked about this stuff around labels, whatever it came to. He says, yeah, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. We understand that. He said, but you can think of it differently, and so relabel it or reframe it. And he said, you talk about it as, if it's post-traumatic, yes, it's after the trauma. So think about it as post-traumatic transformation. And for me, this light bulb just went boom. I got the goosebumps. I got the whole thing. It was like bang. That was it. Because transformation is different to disorder. I'd gone away for 3 days and I came back with a disorder. After 18 months, somebody said, well, think about it as transformation. So transformation is something I can control. It gave me back my power. It gave me back my focus. I became much more aware and conscious of what I was doing, and I became much more grounded, and it was instantaneous.
It created possibilities where before it was more of a barrier.
Yeah. And so I mean, that was the story for me, coming through that on the other side of it. And that's where, when I talk to a lot of people now, I challenge the labels that they put on themselves. I challenge the way that they're thinking about themselves. I challenge the language that they're using to themselves and others. Because it's in language. The brain doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. It'll believe everything you tell it. So when we take control of the language we're using, we take control of us. And in taking control of us, we empower ourselves to be better. And with your feet solidly on the ground, understanding who you are, where you want to be, comfortable with all of the experiences you've got, that makes life such an amazing journey. Yeah.
Well, thank
That's
you.
a deep story.
It
Mitch,
is very deep, but thank you very much for sharing, both of you. It's very personal.
Well, Rowena went through it on the other side of it, observing all of this and challenging me and nurturing me and loving me, which was something that I'm forever grateful for. You know,
Yeah, I bet.
People may not know, but we're a married couple.
Probably worked that out by now.
Yeah.
There's a few scary moments in the middle there, Mitch, with him kind of just driving straight onto roundabouts and not seeing things. You know, the whole dissociation he was talking about.
Back in Mackay.
Yeah. Hypervigilance and flashbacks. I'm sure all of that went on for some time.
So you find, well, I don't know when that would have been, but you recognise you needed help and support. So talk us through a little bit further onto that. We've touched on it a little bit, but how did you reach out? And then how and further to that, how can people reach out to get support whether they know they need it or not?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I suppose in observation, looking back now, I couldn't see outside of that. I didn't think, about looking for help. I was going to work it out myself, and I think that's what a lot of people do, as you've implied. What I know now is that there are a huge amount of resources available to anybody if they're willing to reach out, and it can be just reaching out to a friend. Yep. Just reach out to somebody, just somebody that you trust or somebody that you know. But I think the person to really answer that question more closely would be Rowena, because a lot of the work she's doing in the community and around community groups probably lends itself to an answer there.
But in actual fact, Nick did go to a psychologist. But also I said when he came back, we'll do whatever it takes to help you work through this and whenever you're ready. But the first person he wanted to see was Frank Marchetti, who he mentioned earlier on. And so they came over for dinner, and Frank actually was Army Reserve, wasn't he? And one of his roles was to have to go and speak to parents when their child had been lost.
A child or their parent or
somebody from their family had been killed overseas. And he was really, really good for Nick. And Nick, obviously, as he said before, very much respected him. And he was a good person for that as well. But Nick, being who he is and being fairly independent, he did want to work through it himself. So that's why that one conversation, that one word, which you were talking about earlier, you'd never really know what a difference you're making. Because for Nick, that was just that turning point.
Yeah.
I think knowing, and I've looked a fair amount at trauma, and I'm just looking at it again now, because the thing is, it doesn't have to be as major as Nick's. Let me just say that very quickly. It can be something really simple and something we're totally unaware of or unconscious of, but the unconscious part of our brain, which is a huge part of the brain, like 90 to 95%, holds on to everything we've ever experienced, good, bad and ugly. And so within there, and much as it's hard to think about, if one in four children are being abused, there's some trauma in the background for a lot of people. And if they don't realise it or they don't know how to deal with it, it just keeps on building and growing and has an impact on every part of life, which is very debilitating. And it means that you can't fully engage or enjoy life, and that's sad for me. When there's ways that you can get through it. So by all means, I would say to anybody, choose who you go and see. But there are plenty of people out there you can see with, from a psychologist, maybe you need a psychiatrist with some temporary medication or whatever it takes for you. There's no shame in that. Sometimes you just need to rebalance the brain chemicals back again. It could be a counsellor, it could be us, because what we found is that people because our nature or our space, whatever it might be, our approach, people can open up to us very quickly, and I guess building trust and everything else. And sometimes just having the conversation, somebody listening to them, seeing them, hearing them, and understanding with no judgment and keeping it confidential is what helps them take the first step. And of course, in the background, we all have medical access to medical care and attention when we need it. And unfortunately, because of what's going on, it can be really hard to get into psychologists at the moment. So there are plenty of online options as well, and we can be one of those resources. And yes, I've got some techniques that can help release those things, because essentially what trauma does is it keeps our body in a stuck state. In other words, that hypervigilance and flashbacks is because we haven't allowed the emotional attachment to that event to release itself from the body. And that's a really powerful thing to do. So even body work can help, whether it's whatever your choice of body work would be. And a lot of people don't even think about that. They think it's in here. But actually, any emotion and any trauma, any background memories are all stored all around the body in every cell. So it's really important to recognise that as well.
The other thing is, in the community there are resources like Grapevine have a resource list.
Mental health, and lots of mental health hubs and information out there that can definitely help. There's a lot more on offer these days. It depends on what's going to suit you as an individual.
And I think what Rowena is saying, there's no shame in that. Everything is one step at a time. That was another lesson that I learnt coming off that hill. I didn't know how long it would take to get down. I didn't have any idea about time. All I could do was put one foot in front of the other, and that's what I learned, is if I just slow everything down, take one step, and then I can take another step, and then I can take another step. And gradually over time, in taking those steps, you get far enough away from the event or the experience that you can start to look a little further out.
So that was important right then.
And it's still important now, I think, for people who are caught in that trauma or in that experience. So learn, put one step, just take one step. Whatever that step is, what's the choice or decision I make now? And give yourself some congratulations for at least taking the step. One step at a time, one step at a time. And then eventually you find your sight lines come up and things happen. Because that experience in PNG is just one of many that I've had over time. Which maybe we'll share another day.
But actually that one step sounds very simple, and indeed it is, but that can take anybody in any situation. I mean, for somebody who's very depressed, one step could be just put one step on the ground out of bed, then put the other foot on the ground out of bed, then stand up. It really that simple, because that can be that hard for people when they're in that really stuck, depressed state.
I know you guys work with a lot of businesses, locally and also internationally too.
We have done.
At
the moment.
Not at the moment, and interstate. So I like to talk about stress in the workplace and dealing with stress in the workplace. So run through some techniques that you guys share with companies to deal with that.
Go first?
Yes, I'd like you to go first.
Whether it's one-on-one or as groups, it depends on how it comes up. But I like to at least help understand people. I guess it's my approach overall. If I can help you understand what's going on for you, then we can help you find a way to move on or find some techniques that's going to help you, because it's going to be quite individual. But workplaces are very stressful. Life is very stressful, so it comes up somewhere. So I think the educational part is really good, and as I talk about it, how it builds up and how we all have a sort of tolerance band for stress, so they can understand what's going on in the body. Again, it comes back to the body. We all know when we're feeling stressed. We can't necessarily identify it, but once you start to recognise what's happening, you can then maybe pace back and go, so what just triggered this stress, or has been ongoing for a while, or is it just a one-off? Helping identify what the trigger is can really help. But also, there's a difference between stress and anxiety, the way I describe it as well. But you can manage stress with all sorts of things, because essentially stress in its most simple form is your body going into a fight-flight reaction. In other words, you'll either get very agitated, or you'll want to run away, or you'll freeze, or you'll want to just make everything okay. And that's all a very natural approach to do any of those things. So depending on your nature and sometimes your personality type, your experience, what you've been around and everything else, you might default to one of those when you're stressed. So a lot of angry people in the workshop, in a workplace, can mean there's a lot of stress in that workplace. A lot of people who appear very shut down or holding back can be a result of stress as well. So one of the simplest things we can do is breathe. focus on our breathing, because unless that's your thing, we're often not told how to breathe and how there's so many different breathing techniques out there now that can do all sorts of different things and shift your state, physical state, emotional state, everything really, really quickly. And it's amazing how quickly that can happen when it's described to people, and the science behind it for those that need it.
And on a probably broader level, what you talk about with stress in the workplace with organisations and teams is actually around culture. So what's being enabled? And so we need to explore what's the culture that people desire, what is it that they want, what will they not accept. So we generally work inside of their mission, vision and value set. We have conversations around behaviours, and then we help people to explore why are you triggered by those things? What are the expectations that you've got that you haven't expressed or that you are afraid to express that create these experiences? So we can talk to that with teams and generally do that to set a foundation of how what our culture will be. And then from there we work in a coaching space to help people understand and become more aware of themselves. And there's some wonderful books and other, I guess you'd see YouTube clips and other things that are very insightful for people once they start to become more willing to explore. Because quite often people will tell you, this is just the way I am and I'm not going to change. And I go, well, that's interesting, because if this is the energy cost that it's got for you, how long will you be able to sustain that? Wouldn't you like life to be easier? Wouldn't you like to be more comfortable with what's happening? So what do we need to explore? How can we help you let go of some of this or understand it so you no longer react in the same way?
And equally, it could, as Nick's saying, in a workplace environment, but you also could be bringing a whole lot of stress from your personal environment as well, and the two are very interactive. So it could be, different forms of stress: financial stress, health stress, environmental stress. What you're eating, what's in the environment around you, but literally the environment you're in, working with, because we know very clearly. Again, we can feel it, we can sense it when somebody's having an off day or they're stressed, because everybody starts getting a bit agitated around them. Again, if you can get down to the core of it and then work on that, not fixing it, but finding some kind of resolution in that, it could be a whole combination of different stressors which are causing this stress at work, as well as maybe lack of clarity about what your role is, or lack of psychological safety at work, which is a big thing, or just lack of support. It could be so many things that are causing that person stress, but maybe they can't really talk about it. But there are lots of techniques out there, probably too many to share now, but we're more than happy to share more if somebody wants to contact us or put on the side.
Yeah, great. So where can people find you guys? So in Mackay, your address is, and then also your social channels, your website.
Well, we tend to go through the website. That's www.mindsaligned.com.au. If they're passing through the airport, they'll see our advertising on the back of the toilet doors. Mm-hmm. So that's just a bit of tongue-in-cheek approach. Yeah. So,
and we're by appointment only, so we're in Peel Street, so we're very central, upstairs at number 15, but we're not there all the time, so it's not just like a drop-in thing. So it is best to go via the website and either send us an email, or we're happy to share our mobiles, but maybe as part of this information about the video.
Yeah, great. Well, we're looking forward, our team internally here, to connecting more with Minds Aligned and both yourselves to help us, through coaching or whatever we need. So we're very much looking forward to connecting further next year with that. Thank you very much, Rowena and Nick, for sharing your stories and also your knowledge today. It was really interesting.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah,
great, Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch. It's certainly interesting. Hope we can help.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Change the Game. Proudly brought to you by the QCCS Mackay Cutters.